The Tuft of Flowers by Robert Frost is an introspective poem about a man who goes to a field to turn the mown grass, and when he arrives he discovers that he is there alone. And a butterfly captures his attention, and it goes to a tuft of flowers, and the man takes comfort from those flowers being left there by the mower to conclude that we all work together, whether we're together or apart. And the poem is about an individual's discovery of the camaraderie and fellowship that exists within humankind. The speaker's, or the persona's discovery that he is not actually alone transforms the tone of the poem from one of melancholic acceptance to wonder and delight. Critics have suggested the poem is about the work of a poet, that though they work in isolation, they are broadly working together in the field of poetry and creativity, which is fine, but I think you can even be more general and say it is just about, we are all building upon the work of people who have gone before us, and that's how we are connected. And certainly you could make that argument regarding scientific discoveries, how they are built upon previous work. And so it is with other endeavours. Now, Tuft of Flowers, in terms of its form, it is written in iambic pentameter, which is an unstressed syllable followed by a stressed one, like ta-dum, 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 ta-dum. It's not always the case in a Tuft of Flowers, but it's pretty close strictly in that form. But it's also written in rhyming couplets, which when combined with iambic pentameter, it then makes them heroic couplets. And heroic couplets have been traditionally used in epic poetry such as Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. And further, since the rhymes are generally end-stopped with punctuation, along with the punctuation such as commas, semicolons, or full stops, along with the iambic pentameter, these things create a sense of marching along with the persona, that we are there going through the field with him together. The changing attitude and understanding about the nature of his work is signalled in the repetition of the line, whether they work together or apart. The first line is delivered despondently and with significant sadness and resignation, and later it is replaced with a different understanding and delivered with more happiness and renewed enthusiasm. And in that second line, what we really need to note is the change in the prepositions from within my heart to from my heart. That is a significant change in that the first is introspective and the second is outward looking, where he's communicating to the other, the him that is the mower. So let's now annotate some parts of our poems with technique. So what we said here, we've already mentioned this, but the poem is written in iambic pentameter, and that's true of the whole poem. There are also heroic couplets, so you can see here these couplets, one and son. You can see there that they're end lined, okay, so they're not in, there's no enjambment here. You can see that in the next line, the dew was gone that made his blade so keen, before I came to view the levelled scene. And so keen and scene are the rhyming couplets there, and they're heroic couplets because of the iambic pentameter. Right, so when we, and of course that's the effect of that is the marching beat, walking with the persona. So when we look at this, next 6 lines or so here, what we should pull out here is there's some personification, and there's sound imagery, and the tone of resignation. So we have here, I looked for him behind an aisle of trees. Who is he looking for? He's looking for the mower. Aisle there, aisle of trees, aisle meaning island. It's an imagery about, a lone section of trees. So it's a nice visual image that Frost has created there. And there's the idea of sound coming out too, where he says, I listen for his whetstone on the breeze. That is the sharpening of his scythe. And in the next two lines, the interesting thing there is the verb phrase must be. You know, must be means it's inevitable, or it's unchangeable. And have a think about the tone that creates by using that verbal phrase. And I must be as he had been alone, right? So there's a real sense of resignation that this cannot change, this is inevitable, I am alone as he was alone. And you get that again in that repetition when it comes in the next two lines. As all must be, I said within my heart, whether they work together or apart, right? So everyone is alone, and that is how it is, and it's inevitable and it's unchangeable. So you really get the sense of resignation and isolation and sadness out of that verbal phrase, must be. Now the next part, it begins with a conjunction of but, and that kind of breaks the melancholy briefly because it's marking a change of focus, that something has got the persona's attention. Right, so, but as I said it, then he notices there's a butterfly. So it briefly breaks this, deep resignation that's happening. And what does he see? But he sees a wildered butterfly. And wildered here means actually bewildered. So the butterfly is personified as if it's confused and it's lost and its flight is erratic. Okay, so wildered butterfly is personification. Seeking with memories grown dim overnight some resting flower of yesterday's delight. And in the next part, there's a sense that, this persona thinks that the butterfly's flight is pointless. I marked his flight go round and round. He's not going to find what he was looking for from yesterday's delight. And there's a very clever play on words that occurs here when he says, and then he flew as far as I could see. Okay, his physical eye, but you could also just replace that with the pronoun I, so there's a pun, a play on words there, as far as I could see, and then on tremulous wing came back to me. Okay, that's a lovely image there about the tremulous wing. It's a nice adjective to choose. It means, shaking, trembling, that idea of the movement of the butterfly's wing. There's an interesting thing about, the paradox of questions that have no reply. So in the next section that we look at here, again, it begins with a conjunction, but he turned first. So it's again breaking that melancholy tone that was returning. Initially he sees a butterfly and he thinks, oh, what's going on here? And he thinks, well, this is all pointless, not going to find what it's looking for. And then we get another conjunction. But he turned first and led my eye to look at a tall tuft of flowers beside a brook. Okay, so we have that conjunction which makes the persona stop and consider again. It's breaking that melancholic tone. There's also a brief example of alliteration there with a tall tuft of flowers beside a brook. There's a personification of the leaping tongue of bloom the scythe had spared. Okay, clearly, flowers cannot leap. Beside a reedy brook the scythe had bared. I left my place to know them by the name, finding the butterfly weed when I came. Right, so when we come to the next 4 lines here, these are some interesting lines, and some lines here that Frost himself spoke about on campus. I'll put up a picture of a couple of books where you can find this information I'm going to refer to. So what we get here is, he's talking about, there's an example of personification and, the motivation the mower has for leaving these flowers behind. So he says, the mower in the dew had loved them thus, by leaving them to flourish, not for us, nor yet to draw one thought of ours to him, but from sheer morning gladness at the brim. Alright, so here's the real reason why the mower leaves these flowers. The persona acknowledges he didn't leave them for anyone else. He just left them because they were beautiful, you know, but from sheer delight and pleasure, from sheer morning gladness at the brim. And Frost, as his speeches on campus and in this other book which I put up right now, he says this is the motivation for writing poetry. It's just sheer gladness, simple delight. He doesn't write it for anyone to, you know, turn their thoughts to him and think, oh, Frost is writing for us. It's just about the sheer pleasure of writing. And this is the conclusion too about why did the mower leave the tuft of flowers there? Simply for the delight in the beauty of the flowers at the edge of the brook. Brim, you know, gladness at the brim. I believe, I would suggest here it's, you know, it's alluding to the upper surface of the brook there, you know, to the top of the water. The flowers are at the edge and they're at the brim of the water, and he, you know, the mower has seen it and looks at them and thinks, you know, here's a beautiful flowers by there, just touching this water, right? And so he leaves it. And as an aside, in terms of discovery, you know, Frost also talked about in his lectures about the simple pleasure in reading things for pleasure. You know, not reading it to necessarily because you have to, but reading it for pleasure. And he talks about he writes because it gives him pleasure. So there's a sake in reading things for reading's sake and getting things for pleasure out of it. So we come to the next sequence of lines. You know, the butterfly and I had lit upon. You know, that means to lit upon or light upon, to find unexpectedly. Okay, so he says the butterfly and I had lit upon, nevertheless a message from the dawn. Okay, so even though just before he says the mower didn't leave this as a message, he didn't leave it for us to come along and find. He just left it there because it's beautiful. He then has the persona say, but look, that doesn't matter. Even if he didn't intend it to be a message, there was a message from the dawn. Okay, there's a metaphor there, isn't there, about, you know, dawn cannot leave a message. So there was no message intended by the mower, nevertheless a meaning is taken. And that's true in this postmodern world. We draw meaning from the things that we read, and we get the meaning from it ourselves. That made me hear the waking birds around and hear his long scythe whispering to the ground. So the personification of the scythe, it doesn't actually whisper, but it's a nice use of sound imagery there through that personification. There's a lovely, the poem really does start to move into that camaraderie and fellowship ideas about working together and how, you know, community people are, and we get that particularly in these concluding 8 lines with the word kindred, spirit kindred to my own. Okay, so the word obviously means alike or comparable, the same, they're connected, you know, so that henceforth I work no more alone. There's an interesting comparative statement in the next 2 lines where there's a tone shift. Okay, he's glad, but glad with him I work as with his aid. Okay, there's that statement there, I work as with his aid, as if the person were there. The following lines, and dreaming as it were held brotherly speech. Okay, that's a nice, again, word choice, the adjective indicating closeness and community and connected, you know, that he feels this deep spiritual connectedness to this person, even though they're not physically present, with one whose thought I had not hoped to reach. Okay, so it has been unexpected. And here's this concluding line which has slightly changed, which we spoke about in the introduction. Men work together, I told him from the heart, whether they work together or apart. Okay, so there's a complete change in the tone there, and we can really see that, particularly in those last 2 lines. And it's interesting that change in the preposition from, you know, I told him from the heart, he believes it. That's possibly also, you know, an allusion to to a statement, of Jesus, that out of the mouth, the heart speaks. Okay, so I told him from the heart. When you tell someone from the heart something, you really believe it. And what does he believe? That they work together, they're connected, whether they're physically there or whether they're not present. Okay, so that's a tuft of flowers.